Hello and welcome back to Enjoy Parenting. I'm Kyle Steele, the head of school at VanDamme Academy and father of two. And my co-host is Lisa VanDamme, the founder of VanDamme Academy and mother of four. And we are on part three of what's proven to be one of the most enjoyable topics we've found to discuss on this podcast. We are approaching the question, how should one decide whether or not to have children? And so the recap is that the answer that we've been articulating is more or less, we haven't found exactly the right wording for it, so we'll say it badly at first, that having children should be more like the default that you opt out of rather than an option that you buy into, in the same way that career or romance, it's just assumed that that's going to be a part of a healthy person's life, or friendship or hobbies. And we don't walk around saying, I'm just not a friendship kind of person. I'm just not the kind of person that has friends, or I'm just not the kind of person that has love. If someone says that, you might say, well, that might be something that would be good to talk to a therapist about, because you're leaving a lot of value out of your life. And we're trying to say that parenthood should be in that realm, because the value of being a parent is just so fantastic that that it should have that default, quote unquote, status among values that you plan for in your future. Now, we ended our last episode with two unresolved issues. One is that we never really articulated why we think it should be the default. Exactly what is so fantastic about this value that we think that people should really plan for it and figure out reasons why they wouldn't want to be a parent rather than the other way around. And then the second issue is what should what are some bad reasons to want to be a parent? What are some motivations that will backfire or sabotage for becoming a parent? Were there any other issues, Lisa, you wanted to add to that? Yeah.
I think one of the things we said we were going to address, and maybe started to address, was the most common reasons people articulated for being reluctant to have children, and how we think about those things. So I think that's a really rich topic, because there was a pretty short list of very common apprehensions about having children. And I think I mentioned last time that none of them seemed like deal breakers from my perspective. So from the perspective of the person raising it, it seemed like a potential deal breaker for them. And from my perspective, they didn't seem that way. So I think those would be, I do acknowledge the existence of things that would be deal breakers for having children, but it was interesting that rarely did those match up, what people expressed and what I think of as the potential deal breakers.
Yeah, we started on that a little bit last time, but we could probably put a bow on that or just articulate it much more clearly. I think we got into it a bit in the clubhouse, but it would be good to put it in this recording too. Yeah. My inclination would be to start with what maybe we should have been starting with to begin with, is why we think it's such a big value. Do you mind starting there and then going to the other topics after that? Does that sound good to you?
I don't mind, but I find it an extremely, as passionate as I am about teaching and motherhood and the experience of being a mother, I find it very difficult to articulate. So you have to go first.
Yeah, putting the question to you and me is kind of like going to a fish and saying, why is water so great?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are they going to say? Yeah. So I did give this some thought. I woke up this morning at about 3:45 because my 3-month-old needed some attention. And so I was just holding her in a rocking chair, mulling this over. So I do have some thoughts on my head. When I first approached this question, I found myself thinking about it really rationalistically. Like I was trying to persuade someone that's skeptical of it. And I was coming up with reasons that were things like, well, it'll diversify the values that are in your life, so that if one part of your life is doing poorly, you've got other things you can fall back on to give meaning in your life. Or like it could motivate you to be a better person, that having a child gives you a drive to pursue other things in life, or even like having a strong relationship with your kids gives you more support in the future. And what I was doing was I was trying to say, does having children support other values that a skeptical person already cares about? And I think that is a wrong way to go about it. And like, what I realized is what I was doing was saying something like, the reason you should get married is that with two incomes, you can achieve your financial goals faster. Like, that might be true, but that's not the reason to get married, is to financial independence. So what occurred to me, and tell me if this idea, if you like it, is that the reason to have kids is the relationship you'll have with that child. And there are secondary things outside of it that the relationship impacts. But it's all the primary reason to have children is the relationship you have with those children. And that's super hard to explain to people on the outside of it, but we can still try our best.
Yeah, I just have to say that as you're articulating the question, the phrase that came to my mind is, the reason is the relationship. I think that'd be a book title, should you ever wish to.
Yeah.
The reason is the relationship. And it is hard to articulate. And it's interesting to, the reason for a marriage is the relationship also. But parenthood is a distinct kind of relationship. So then trying to identify, and I'm sorry, I still have post-COVID cough. And so the reason is what is unique to a parent-child relationship.
Yeah. And you wouldn't look at those other relationships and say, why do you have friendship? Well, it's so that people can help you move your furniture, or that you can have more networking for your career. Like, you don't triangulate values across each other like that. Some of them kind of rise. It's like, there's an analogy of like a mountain range, and there's different peaks for the major values. It's not like one builds the other in some way. Mm-hmm. So with that said, here's some of the things that I think are me trying to explain what is so great about this relationship to someone on the outside, and what I wish that these things were more prevalent in our culture, so that more people thought of it as a default, in the same way they think of career and romance as a default. So let's see. My first thought was, what I love so much is watching my kids discover their own values. That just to be someone that observes that, they find the food that they like, the games that they like, the friends that they like. That is enormously satisfying and pleasant and meaningful to watch another person discover their values. And it kind of puts me more in touch with what it means to be a human myself and to live my own life. Like, it's almost like looking at myself in a mirror a little bit, watching my son pursue values is enjoyable in its own right. And it kind of reminds me about my own pursuit of values in my life. Mm-hmm. And then similar to that you get to share your values with them, that there are things that I really like and care about that I get to show to Isaac and to Edith, and that's really fun. That's really pleasant. That's really special. And it gives me a new appreciation for those things in my life, like that experience that a lot of parents talk about, where they watch a movie with their children that was a favorite of theirs, and then watching it through their kids' eyes, it's like they're watching it for the first time again. That's a common experience people describe. Yeah. So I don't know, I've got a few other things on the list, but I don't just want to run down the list. I want to see if there's anything. Are any of these resonating with you?
Absolutely. Of course. I mean, one of the daily joys of my existence is just being witness to my kids' expression of their values in any form. Coco is completely obsessed with gymnastics now, and that will manifest in so many. I mean, she does something like 8 hours of gymnastics a week now, and that feels woefully insufficient to her. She just, and being able to see close up this person who means so much to me, feeling this enthusiasm for something, is an incredible thrill. And, you know, as I've said, anybody who's Facebook friends with me, I think my persona is joy in watching my children just figure something out, or express a love of something, or say something clever, or it's just such a pleasure to be witness to those things. So I think what I'd like to add to the list is related to that, but I feel it's like your fish and water example, because I feel like it's the kind of backdrop thing behind the value in those experiences, but it's very hard to articulate because it's so fundamental. The things that are so fundamental can be hard to articulate, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And I'm going to start with a weird way of approaching it. So there's sometimes people who will have insecurities in relationships, romantic relationships, will feel like, well, I was chosen by my partner as the best person available to them, or the best person in their mind to fulfill this role of romantic relationship. And thinking of it in those terms will make them feel like, so if somebody else comes along who has a better checklist of qualifications, then I then become dispensable. Well, I hope, you know, people with a healthy attitude toward relationships wouldn't look at it that way, and there's a number of reasons why you shouldn't look at it that way. One of them is that, so let me get to the one that's related here. So when you have a relationship with somebody, your relationship is at first a response to the other person and their values and their identity and their sense of life and their charm and everything that attracts you to them. And then over time, the relationship becomes shared experience. The relationship starts as that response and then evolves into something with, and you can think of it like more and more intertwining fibers between your two souls. The more life you live together, the more experiences you have together, the more like deeply, fundamentally, intensely connected you are. I'm going to cry making this point, but because with a child, you have that from the moment they're born. All of their experiences are yours, all of them. So you have formed a connection of life experience with this person from the moment, from before they, open their eyes to the world, because the mother experiences it growing inside her own body. So it's just, there's something profoundly special about having a person in your life that you have this close, beautiful, intimate connection with for the entirety of their life. That has to be one of the things that's distinctive to the parenting relationship in comparison to others.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Sorry, there's so many things I can respond to in that, because I used to be that insecure romantic person, for one thing. And it took me a while to realize what you're saying is that at first, it is a bake-off between you and all the other prospects, and you won the bake-off. But then after that, like you're not competing in the same game. The love is which means what makes you irreplaceable, what makes it an irreplaceable value, is the experience and the time in the relationship. And that with children, there's just it's that dialed up to 1,000, because there's so many experiences that you're sharing with that person. So like, why do we think that parenting should be the default, quote unquote? Well, how much love do you want to have in your life? How many irreplaceable values do you want to have in your life? Because the children will be that, because of just the depth of the relationship and the time and the experience. And so there's kind of two dimensions here where we could say that the depth of the relationship, the amount of time that you're spending irreplaceably with them, And then the thing, what that time looks like is some of the stuff that I'm talking about here, that you're sharing values, you're watching them discover values, you're helping them learn how to explore the world and to resolve things for themselves. And there's some of the most meaningful contact you could have with another person is to help them at that ground level with uh, cultivating values that they care about in their life. So I guess maybe I almost think we could leave it there. We could say you should have kids because it's hard to imagine how much more love you could have than that. And it's because you are having irreplaceable experiences with them from even before they're born. And there's more that we could say that
well, let me add, can I add one other aspect of, so the phrase that we often use in regard to the relationship with children, I mean, not you and me, but just kind of the cliche phrase is it's the experience of unconditional love. And I think people often think of unconditional love as meaning non-judgment, and that you're stuck with kind of a if you're being taking a critical eye on that, it's like, well, you're stuck with this person, and or the romanticized version is you feel love no matter what under all circumstances, which is a bit of a fantasy too. But I think the truth in the unconditional love is related to what I was just suggesting, that because there's this absolute interconnection from the first moments of their life, there's an intensity of relationship built from the very first moments, and that just grows and is compounded and grows exponentially over time. So there's so intense a connection that the idea of ever being separated from this person is almost unfathomable, which is not true even of friend. I mean, all of us have experienced friendships that come and go, that dwindle and fade, but it's so much. There are people who tragically get alienated from their own children, but that's a much more rare phenomenon, I think, not because of some sense of duty, but because of this intensity of interconnection that you have from the start. So, and I suspect that a relationship can grow proportional with the commitment you have to that relationship. And so when you bring somebody into the world and are responsible for their existence and for their well-being for the first 18 years of their lives and beyond in certain ways, that's a commitment that allows connection to grow in ways you might not be so careful to allow for that growth in other relationships. It's a scenario that allows for the growth of the greatest love you can experience and the greatest degree of connection you can have with another person.
Yeah. I want to make sure that I understand the point that you're making there. It's that the uniqueness of the parent-child relationship is that you're more or less locked in for a certain number of years. And rather than being a hindrance or a burden, that is the conditions for making an even more irreplaceable relationship that can muscle out most of the other relationships you're going to have in your life. Because at a minimum, you're getting those 18 years of irreplaceable experiences that bind you together with that person, if you're doing it right. Well, I think that people can tell us if they think that we have made a pretty strong case for why having planning for parenthood in your future should be something like a default. That to summarize it briefly, it's that you want to have love in your life. You want to have irreplaceable values in your life. And it's hard to get more irreplaceable than a child that you have unique, personal, deep experiences with for their entire life, even before they're born. So if that's how we understand parenthood, then who wouldn't want to sign up for that sort of thing? I think it gets lost in, bad childhoods that we might have had, or strange ways that it's shown in movies and TV shows. But I think that if that was the more common understanding, more people would see it as a default, the way that they do with romance and career.
Yeah.
Should we move? Where do you want to go to next? Should we talk about bad motivations to have kids, or motivations not to have kids that we're skeptical of?
I think the latter, because it'll be interesting to integrate what we just said with those reservations that people have about having children and how those things connect.
So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, one of the most common we heard was, you have a good relationship with your parents. I have a good relationship with my parents. So it was not something that we anticipated as one of the main objections people would raise. But for a lot of people, it seemed like it was alienation from their own parents and a bad relationship with their parents that made them think, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And that kind of took two forms. One was, I didn't like it when I was someone's child, so I don't want to have a child. Or I might want to have kids, but I'm worried that I won't know how to do it right, that I'll repeat the things that were difficult in my childhood. So yeah, can you tell me what makes you skeptical of that? What makes you say, I don't know if that's a real disqualifier? That might be it. There's disqualifiers, and then there's challenges to overcome. Those might be the two categories we'll put things in.
Yeah. Well, so that feels to me like a challenge that can be overcome. And with what we discussed before, if there's a strong sense that there is a value to be achieved, if it's overcome, then it would be regarded through that lens, that this is, that it's unfortunate that I ended up alienated from my parents, but that's not necessary. And there are things very well within my control to avoid that happening. I think there's a lot in culture stacked against people understanding and realizing that. There's just, I don't know, society feels like it's become very fragmented. And this is true even in my life, where my family is so scattered across the globe that it can be difficult to routinely feel the value of ever-present family. So even independent of bad relationships, it's just something that seems like it's lacking in a lot of people's lives. But that strikes me as a problem of culture that I don't want to I wouldn't want to just blindly adapt to. It's something I'd want to push back against and say, no, but the value is there, if we've lost sight of it, let's try to take hold of it again instead of just letting it go.
Yeah. I keep using the analogies to other values, that if your father was a drunk and a layabout, that would be something that you'd want to overcome. You'd want to find people that had good careers, and then you try to model yourself after their behavior, and it would be a real triumph to achieve that sort of thing. And so if you have poor models of family around you, what you're saying though is that it's harder to find. You can find good examples of career by just being in the workplace. You go to enough jobs, you're going to find someone that's running their career well that can be a role model. It's much harder to naturally find good examples of parenting. You kind of have to already be a parent to have access to more parents, and especially because we don't have community organizations like church in the same way that we used to. There's not a chance to, it's the families are segregated over here and they know each other, and then the bachelors and bachelorettes are over here and they know each other. There's not a lot of crossover between those two. Now, another category of reason that people didn't want to have kids had a lot to do with it getting in the way of the pursuit of other values, specifically career, but also as a secondary thing, something like travel and hobbies and self-development. This idea that if I have a child, then I won't have enough time to work 80 hours a week. or to start businesses, and that's really important to me. So I'm disqualified for that reason. Where does that sit with you? Does that disqualify someone, or is that a challenge to overcome?
I would say that's guilty until proven innocent, because I know that there are monomaniacs. I mean, what pops into my head is there's a similar question people ask about education sometimes. Is education dispensable for the genius prodigy?
Mhm.
And I think you and I would say no, but you can conceive of a scenario where somebody is such a talent and such a monomaniac and so completely devoted to some specific area in life that even education, which is so fundamental a value, gets relegated to a lower place on their hierarchy of values. But that strikes me as exceptionally rare. I think too many people, I think probably way more people think of themselves as needing to be wholly single-mindedly devoted to career than actually do. So part of it might be inflating the value of their career in the context of their whole life. And part of it has to be overestimating the ways in which family will interfere with the pursuit of those values. And I think it was in Clubhouse that I mentioned this, so I'll mention it again just in case. But my husband was telling me that when he was in an organization of entrepreneurs, and he was actively considering the question of did he want to have children or not, he looked around him and noticed that the most successful entrepreneurs he knew had children. So the idea that, well, would this compromise my ability to be an entrepreneur seemed demonstrably false when he just looked around him. And I think he even said that he thought it was the inverse, that, the most successful ones did have, not that there's a causal relate. Well, there could be, I don't know. But anyway, that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I feel really similar to that it's going to be very, very rare. More people are going to put themselves into the I'm the exception than actually belong there. And I just think that they're misunderstanding the dynamics too, that it's not like having more values in your life decreases the other ones. Often there's some sort of multiplicative effect that you do better in your career when you have a good romance outside. Like that, it sounds like the attitude from Rocky, his coach. It's like women weaken knees or something. I can't remember what his line was. That like, he didn't want Rocky to have a girlfriend because it would give him weak knees for the fight. It's like I just don't think that's actually the way that these values relate to each other. Like on paper, you can say, yeah, there's less time here and more time there, but your productive ability is not purely a product of time. Right. There's a lot of other factors that go into that, including how balanced your psychology is, and that can really depend on values you have outside of career. So let's see. I'm trying to think of other big categories of disqualifiers for us to consider. Although I also see that we're short on time. Yeah. Could I share what my thoughts were on the bad reasons to have kids, because I think it connects to where we started with good reasons to have kids. I would say that any reason for having kids that is primarily outside of the relationship with the child is suspect from the beginning. And you see a lot of these are going to be things that people are very familiar with. There's kind of the obvious, like, I want to make my family or my mother or my community happy. They want me to have kids. They keep asking for grandkids. Like that is a thing outside the relationship. Or you want to do it to improve your relationship with your partner, that it will somehow bring you closer together with your romantic partner. If the starting point is outside the relationship with the child, it's setting you up for sabotage, because you're kind of putting the secondary above the primary in that way. And another one that I see surprisingly often, maybe it's only surprising to me because I like my childhood, but there's a lot of people that kind of want to get revenge on their own childhood. And they have kids for that. Like, my dad was an asshole, was a bastard, and I'm going to make sure that I am not that way. And that's kind of a driving force. Like you are drafting a child into your own personal drama in a way that's really unfair to them.
Yeah.
So most of if you're giving a reason for having a child and it's not, if it's outside the relationship with that child, you're probably getting at best you're getting the cart before the horse. All the things that I mentioned could be good things about having children. I do feel closer to my wife because of the children that we have. My mother is really happy to have grandkids, and I like sharing that with her.
Yeah.
I do feel pride in what my child does, but I
Yeah.
didn't have a child to have pride in someone. I didn't
Mhm.
have a child so that he could achieve things and bring honor to me.
Yeah.
So, those things can be great secondarily to the relationship or secondary to the relationship. But if something outside the child is your reason, then you're sabotaging it. That was really quick. And we're running short on time. How's that
I,
sound?
I, I think that's the perfect way to conclude. And I'm very satisfied with how this conversation went, because we came to the idea that the reason is the relationship. That's the shorthand for it.
Mhm.
And what is distinctive about the parent, something about what is distinctive about the parent-child relationship, though I imagine volumes could be written on that topic, but I feel
Yeah.
satisfied to have articulated it in some form. So the reason is the relationship, and it's a really special one.
Yeah. How much love do you want in your life? That's
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thanks, everyone. You can join us on Clubhouse if you want to keep the conversation going with us. And we'll talk to you next week. And we've got a couple of topics that have come our way. One is how to make calculations about risk and safety. And another is how to handle youth sports and other extracurriculars in your kid's life. So stay tuned next week and see what we get to. Thanks.
All right. Bye.